So the movies I saw last year were Mary Poppins Returns, Spider-Man Far From Home, Aladdin, It Chapter 2, Joker, Maleficent Mistress of Evil, Frozen 2, Doctor Sleep, and Cats. Out of all of those movies, Maleficent Mistress of Evil was by far my favorite movie of 2019.
Don't ruin my morning.
I saw this movie on Halloween, so I was already pumped. I saw it with my mom, who I don't really get to hang out with one-on-one that often. I saw it after 2 margaritas and a little bit of a Mai Tai, so I was already having a real good time. And I saw it in 3D. So when I bought it on Blu-ray, I was trying to keep a level head. Let's not go in with super high expectations.
Best movie of 2019. Ooh. Ooh. Ow. And she's, oh my.
This movie slaps. I really like it. It's still my favorite movie of 2019. But why? Why? And also, like, what's the movie about? Okay, so here's the premise. So it's 5 years after the events of the first film. Aurora is now the queen of the Moors. Tensions are higher than ever between the magical creatures and the human folk, particularly in Prince Philip's kingdom. They really don't like fairies there, just like my hometown. But in a show of unity, Prince Philip proposes to Aurora and she accepts. They're gonna get married, there's gonna be a wedding. The queen, Prince Philip's mother, requests that both Aurora and Maleficent come to dinner so that she can meet her new daughter-in-law and the woman who raised her. And Maleficent curses the king. But it turns out that Michelle Pfeiffer has a plan to turn Aurora and Maleficent against each other and fan the sparks that will turn into the flame of war. Right off the bat, what is the stuff I like? I just really love the characters. Michelle Pfeiffer is a bangin' villain. I just really love this dynamic between this pretty princess and her cryptid goth mom. I love that this is really just a big, badass action fantasy movie that also happens to be like really girly. It's so girly. It feels like a Barbie movie. Also, I just think it's a good sequel. So right off the bat, like, I'm not a film critic. I don't feel confident calling this a review. I do sincerely want this to be like a booktube channel. I only want to sit here and tell you why I personally really like this movie, and since this isn't a review, I can use supplementary materials. I have the novelization of the first movie, The Curse of Maleficent, The Tale of Sleeping Beauty, and Heart of the Moors. So I feel like I can't really talk about Maleficent Mistress of Evil without at some point bringing up the film to which it is a sequel of. My air conditioner is out, and this jean jacket is hot. I remember seeing this movie in 2014 with my friend Caitlin, and I walked out of the theater and I thought, that was okay. And I remember I said to her, I would watch that again. And I never did. So of course, after I saw Maleficent 2 and it changed my whole life, I decided to rewatch the first one, and it was worse than I remembered. So the plot of the first Maleficent essentially just kind of follows the same plot as the original animated Sleeping Beauty, but with like a different Act 1 thrown in there. I'm gonna try to narrow it down to just like these 2 things that I think really work against the film. Those things are the world building and the relationship between Maleficent and Aurora. I think Maleficent 1 has this tonal dissonance where the actual plot is essentially, you know, the same silly, nonsensical fairy tale story, but you've got all these weird details they introduce very early on, that there's the magical Moors, and then there's the human kingdoms, and they don't like each other, and they're constantly at war. This does not actually play into the plot in any way. This is just like a world-building beat. The novelization kind of tries to integrate that world-building aspect a little more, but it's not like a plot point. All it really does is invite your audience to pick apart the politics and the logic of the world, and for this particular movie, that is not to its benefit. So for example, King Stefan still asks the 3 good fairies to watch over Aurora until she turns 16 to hide her from Maleficent, which, given this new piece of world building, why would he ensure her to the three magical people in his court. It doesn't help that in this particular retelling of the story, the fairies are portrayed as being bumbling idiots. Also, because of the world building, we have sort of a map of where like the kingdom is, and then here's the moors over here. So having them hide Aurora in the forests just puts her closer to where Maleficent lives. Like, Maleficent is within walking distance. For that matter, the entire conceit of this film is that the fairies are so bad at raising her that she keeps almost dying, and Maleficent has to help them raise her so she can keep her alive, so she can kill her later. And yeah, that's it. So this brings us to the relationship between Maleficent and Aurora. A lot of the reason why Maleficent and Aurora's relationship feels so weird in this movie, I think, has mostly to do with structure. This movie is pretty much entirely just the plot of Walt Disney's Sleeping Beauty. Act 1 and Act 2 of that film are just kind of mushed into an Act 2, and then they add in a new Act 1, which is a Maleficent childhood backstory. Also, fun fact, I was doing research for this, and did you know that this movie had an entirely different Act 1 originally? Miranda Richardson and Peter Capaldi were in it. And I don't mean like this was in the original script and Miranda Richardson and Peter Capaldi were in talks or were attached to the screenplay. No, I mean like they were cast, paid them, they filmed it, they played it for test audiences, and test audiences apparently didn't care for it. They thought it was kind of boring. What the heck? Let's just throw it all out and write an entirely different Act 1. Sorry, that was a big tangent, but I just thought that was crazy. Where was I? I mean, to be fair, honestly, it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly where like Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 start and stop. Well, it's easy to tell where Act 3 stops. But the middle portion of the film involves Maleficent helping to raise Aurora from the shadows. And then when Aurora is about 15 and played by Elle Fanning, they meet for the first time. Aurora totally changes her life, which I guess is what, in theory, is what the movie's about. But because of the structure and just how much stuff happens in the film, Elle Fanning and Angelina Jolie really only kind of have like 20 minutes to build that deep on-screen connection. This is like a really weird relationship. It kind of reads more like a big sistery type situation. They just kind of seem like close friends. Maybe there's like an auntie vibe. A lot of people ship Maleficent and Aurora. It's a weird, undefined relationship. The novelization point blank just says at the end, they are mother and daughter, but it feels very tell, don't show. The movie straight up feels like it's missing scenes. We see the seasons change, so we know it's been like 6 months, let's say. So there's this scene like right around the start of Act 3 where Aurora is told the story of how she was cursed, and she goes running and crying to her fairy godmother, which was cute. I like that part. My aunties told me I was cursed by an evil fairy named Maleficent. Is that your name? And it's supposed to be like this dramatic moment, but it's like, girl, you don't know her name. So here's the thing. This is the official film novelization of the movie, and this is the same book. I guess the idea here is that it's told in the form of like short stories that you could read to a child, but each little section is told from the perspective of a different character. So like one of the three good fairies has a section, and one of Maleficent's childhood friends has a section, and Aurora has a section too. And it's not like dumbed down kiddie writing. Like they're essentially on the same reading level. It's even like about the same length. They're also both written by Elizabeth Rednick. I don't know, I just find it really funny, the idea that Disney commissioned an author to write a novelization for their film, and then they were like, oh hey, Miss Rednick, could you just like do it again? It does have these like really pretty pictures, very pretty pictures. So because Elizabeth Rednick writes the Aurora parts of this story from Aurora's perspective, she can't just repeat it. So instead, as like a compromise, she just has Maleficent guess with astonishing accuracy exactly what's happening to Aurora. While she wasn't there to witness it, she knew exactly what Aurora was going to do next. She was going to race home, grab the horse from the cottage's small stable, and take off. She wouldn't stop to think about what her aunts would say. And while Maleficent wasn't there to witness the reunion, she had a good idea of how that would go too. King Stephen Stefan would see Aurora, and at first he would think she was just some common country girl. Then Maleficent figured he would tell Aurora that she was beautiful like her mother, but that would be as far as fatherly kindness would go, for he would quickly realize that Aurora had arrived back a day early and that the fairies had not done their job. He would panic and order that Aurora be brought to a safe place where she would be forced to remain until the next day. Aurora wouldn't have a chance to argue, but before she was led away, she would ask about her mother, and Stefan would ignore her question, leaving it to a hapless guard to break the news that her mother had died. That was the way it would happen, Maleficent mused. Aurora gets cursed, and Maleficent wakes her up, sees her godmother, and smiles, and is just really happy to see her now. The curse of Maleficent tries like really hard to explain this away. I was so mad at her before, yet, and Aurora thought long and hard, I'm not now. That feeling had faded. In its place, she felt a sense of peace, as though all was as it should be. True, Maleficent might have cursed her, but that had been a long time before. She must have had her reasons. And then that's just kind of it. Aurora forgives her, and they go live in the forest, and Maleficent crowns her the Queen of the Moors, and everybody's happy. One of the comments that I hear a lot about Maleficent Mistress of Evil is that it's just tonally all over the place. I really disagree. I think for the most part it's pretty tonally consistent. At least it's way more tonally consistent than the first film. The sequel really takes the two most glaring things about the first film, which are the weird underdeveloped relationship between Maleficent and Aurora and the weird world building, and makes the improving upon those things the focus of the next installment. So now let's talk about the villain of the movie, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, Queen Ingrid. I really love her. I really like that this movie doesn't do the Disney thing and have her be like a surprise twist villain. Michelle Pfeiffer's first on-screen moment is her picking up a loaded crossbow and pointing it at her servant while she smiles mischievously. Her whole plan is to turn all the humans against the Moorfolk through deception and like manufacturing a crisis so that she can have an excuse to go to war with them. Her plan is to exterminate an entire race of people, conquer their land, and take their resources for herself. Part of this plan requires her to desecrate a burial ground. She amasses a powerful army and literal weapons of mass destruction. One reviewer even interpreted this plot point as the creation of guns. She's been sending poachers to the moors to collect intel. She has a whole army that she's just keeping secret that her husband just doesn't know about. I really love Ingrid because she is a great successor villain to King Stefan, because her motivations and her story like actually do tie into the plot of humans versus the fairies. There's all these cute little details to her character as well, like how she's allergic to flowers, and we see in certain scenes that she's averse to sunlight. All the sets in the castle are very stony and cold, not a lot of wood. There's all these murals of hunts where animals are being killed. There's also this like really powerful irony about how nature is the one thing she hates the most, and yet all that she's fighting for is to attain this very symbol of nature's purity, which is the moors. So the film opens with this narrator telling us how the story of Maleficent traveled the land, but the story got twisted somehow, and now Maleficent was the villain all over again. Do you know what makes a great leader, Aurora? Ingrid asked. The ability to instill fear in your subjects, and then use that fear against your enemies. The story really leans into this element about how people in power create a narrative to other a certain type of person or a group of people, and their followers will just parrot that narrative and just not really question it, which I think is really topical. Though to be fair, this film does really kind of fall into that trap of, well, there was just one problematic person. It wasn't the system or anything like that. I think Heart of the Moors kind of leans more into that whole thing about the system also being bad. Aurora has ordered all of the iron in the kingdom to be removed. Iron is deadly to fairies in this universe, by the way. And she wants everyone to be pro-fairy in this kingdom. And her advisors and all of her guards are sort of like, I mean, good luck with that. Iron is literally built into the foundation of the castle and its support system. It's a main economic export for the kingdom. She can't just remove it overnight and then that's that. In the end, the book doesn't really give a clear solution for this. Like, yeah, we can't easily remove iron from every single aspect of our life. It's so embedded in it. Let's talk about the novelization really quick. If there's anything I don't like about this novelization, it's Ingrid. I get the impression that Elizabeth Rudnick did not really like this character. Maybe in the script, Ingrid was like a really lame character. And it's only because she's played by Michelle Pfeiffer that she's like really interesting and cool. This just does that thing where the novelization just lays all of its cards out on the table and tells you exactly what her evil plan is, exactly where she stands with every character. Like in the movie, she's clearly the villain, don't get me wrong, but there's like levels of intrigue where you don't quite know what her plan is or where she stands with everybody. When she like whispers menacingly into the king's ear after she curses him, it's supposed to be like, oh snap, she cursed him. It's like a surprise. Oh, and what's worse, she's not maternal. So there's this scene where Prince Philip tells his parents, oh, I just proposed to Aurora. And Queen Ingrid is like, oh son, I'm so happy for you. And she gives him a hug. The novelization goes out of its way to like scream in your face that her hugging him is weird because she never does it. Like, it's not a warm hug. But in the movie, it's just like a nice scene and she's acting very warm and you don't suspect anything. And in fact, it's Philip who hugs her. I think this characterization of her is like really does not service the story. It actually makes it less interesting. In the third act, there's this part where Aurora just like crashes through a window while war rages outside, while Philip is crouching over the bed of his dying father. Aurora is like, look, I know this is not the best time, but your mom is evil and I need you to help me stop her. I don't know, I think having her be this more complicated character is a much more interesting take. And also it makes his relationship with Aurora seem a lot stronger because when she tells him this, it's really cool that he's willing to listen to Aurora when she's telling him something that's very clearly true. In the book, it's almost like he's like looking for an excuse to cut his mom out because he's just never liked her. I mean, obviously Ingrid is not a good person. She's like a paint-by-numbers fascist. She's a war criminal. I'm not saying she's justified at all. I mean, like she's literally the mistress of evil, but I think she's a really interesting character and that Michelle Pfeiffer plays her with such great charisma. You can understand her story where she's a woman living in this world ruled by wishy-washy, incompetent men. It makes sense that she would turn into this person. The book kind of tries to paint the reason why she's evil as being she's not maternal and she doesn't know her place, which I really do not like. There's a point in the movie where she tells Aurora, being queen is more than running around barefoot with flowers in your hair. And she's right. Aurora's like not a good queen. But like put a pin in that. But don't prick your finger on that pin or you'll fall into a sleep-like death. So one of the things I really like about this movie is that it's about these three women who are all powerful and interesting, but in different, unique ways. Aurora is very sweet and gentle and kind, but a little idealistic and kind of naive, maybe too trusting of others. Michelle Pfeiffer's Queen has a very cold, brutal take on the nature of power and the responsibilities that come with it. To her, being a ruler is a very unpleasant responsibility where you're required to shed your humanity and your sense of sympathy towards others so that you can get stuff done. Maleficent exists in sort of this teeter-tottering middle ground where she is passionate and affectionate about some stuff, but she can also still be pretty cold and distrusting. So I guess this brings us to the main event, Maleficent. Let's talk about our girl. So OG Maleficent is probably one of, if not the most fondly regarded Disney villain of all time. There's something very entertaining and fun about watching a character who is just evil because they're evil and they think that that's fun. Seeing Maleficent reworked within the framework of, oh, she was just evil because she was like mad about a thing, but she was actually like really sweet and cool and nice the whole time, didn't really sit well with, I think, most audiences. I think most people wanted this movie to be about like an anti-hero Maleficent. Both Mistress of Evil and Holly Black's Heart of the Moors try to compromise on that characterization by reworking her character into just being frigid bitch with a heart of gold. She's not really evil, but she's not like nice. Mistress of Evil opens to the scene of these poachers being straight up killed by her. And given the way Ingrid brings it up later, you think, oh, maybe someone's framing her for those deaths, but like, no, she just straight up killed them. I mean, yeah, poaching isn't cool, but imagine if like a Spider-Man movie opened to a neighborhood kid stealing his neighbor's dog, and then Spider-Man just swooped down and killed him in a very graphic manner. I've also heard some people say that they felt that Maleficent was just totally reset as a character, and she just learns the same lesson about getting over her prejudice towards humans, and I disagree with that as well. The first movie is really about her dealing with and moving past this specific trauma that happened to her, and realizing that in her anger she has continued this cycle of abuse. And so her arc is more her making things right with Aurora. The film still ends with her and Aurora abandoning the human world to go live in the moors, so you get this impression that Aurora is more just an exception to the rule. So in the beginning of the film, after they've all been invited to Philip's castle for dinner, Aurora gives Maleficent a headpiece to cover her horns because she feels like her appearance will make her new in-laws uncomfortable, which I gotta say, that's a brutal move, Aurora. This one action is what's kind of gonna set up Maleficent's story for the whole film. So of course, Queen Ingrid frames Maleficent for a crime that she did not commit. Aurora believes the word of her new human in-laws over her, so Maleficent pieces out, feeling betrayed. As she is fleeing, Maleficent is injured by this henchwoman who looks like the teacher from Glee, but she isn't, I checked. But she is saved by this mysterious person. And it turns out that person is another Maleficent. It turns out that Maleficent is what's known as a dark fae, and that she was by no means the last of her species. The dark fae for centuries have been hunted down to the point where they are forced to live in hiding on this island that's just like a giant nest. The dark fae are really cool. They're like one with nature. They're very spiritual. These characters have their own mythos and lore. There's this new character who's like their de facto leader named Connell, played by actor Chiwetel Ejiofor. He tells Maleficent that she is the direct descendant of the Dark Phoenix, the first of the Dark Fae. That's why Maleficent has like weird green magic that nobody else has. The Dark Fae are not too happy about having to hide in seclusion for all their lives, so it looks like the scales might be tipping towards war on their end as well. So given this setup, you might conclude that this movie is using a fictional group of mystical magical people as a stand-in for real indigenous peoples. So whereas the first Maleficent was about women's pain and patriarchy, Maleficent 2 is about colonialism, which is kind of weird, especially when you take into consideration that Angelina Jolie is like the extra special, powerful one. I understand that your first movie had a predominantly lily white cast, and you want to diversify the sequel, and you have to work with what you have. On my first watch of this movie, I took in this group of people as being this one homogenous tribal group. However, the book explains the Dark Fae come from all over the world, and that the different types of Fae have their own distinct culture and look. Apparently, inspiration for the Dark Fae came from a science project that Angelina Jolie's daughter was working on at the time about all of the different biomes. There's tundra fae, there's desert fae, there's forest fae, and jungle fae. In an interview, Angelina Jolie even said, they aren't divided by color, they're not divided by continent or race. In our minds, we think of Africa, we think of Asia, we think of Europe. You can see how the visual designs are more indicative of different cultures rather than just one homogeneous blob. So in that way, you could interpret the Dark Fae as being representative of just any malign outsider group. Anybody who looks different, or whose life involves beliefs or cultures outside of the norm. Though the story still does appropriate that colonialism narrative. I don't know how sensitive or appropriate that is, and I don't presume to be an authority on that. So back to the whole subplot with Maleficent and the Dark Fae. So I mentioned before that Maleficent stands at a sort of mutual ground between Aurora's optimistic kindness and Ingrid's more cutthroat ways of thinking. This isn't anything new to the character, it actually was set up in the first film. There's a line in the narration that states that only a great hero or a great villain could ever unite the two kingdoms. But it turns out it was actually united by someone who is both a great hero and a great villain, Maleficent. This middle ground take is actually paralleled within the film itself between the Dark Fae's Connell, and Bora. Bora is this cold, warmongering dude with a lot of beef. He never seems to exhibit compassion towards the dark fae themselves. He's more defined for his anger towards humans and his need for retribution. This is a lot like Maleficent's arc from the first film. It wasn't about her getting over what Stefan did to her or forgiving him. I mean, she literally kills him at the end of the movie. More so, it was about her learning that she had taken this anger and this rage and let it control and define her entire life. So much so that it turned her into this lonely, isolated, mean-spirited person who is never really happy. On the other hand, we have Connell, who exhibits a lot of Aurora's more, oh, let's just learn to get along qualities. At the end of the film, he ends up dying at the hands of the very humans he dreamed of making peace with. This parallels the fate of Maleficent's parents, Lysander and Hermia from the books, showing on two different occasions that this super pacifism rarely works. Bora was not wrong because he wanted to fight. He was wrong because he wanted to fight for the wrong reasons. He just wants to take his anger out on humans, including his allies. He doesn't really care about the actual livelihoods of the Fae folk. There is this part in the narrative where he explains to Maleficent what his plan is, that he is going to attack the kingdom during Aurora's wedding, kill Queen Ingrid, kill the king, and kill Prince Philip. Aurora is strangely absent from these plans, and I wish in order to drive home this theme he had included her on his hit list. Aurora is the literal queen of the Moors and the fair folks' #1 advocate and biggest fan. So him aiming his revenge at her would have just really driven home that he's just blindly aiming his anger at allies. Then during that big weird battle scene where Philip has a big speech about peace and how, you know, this war is being fought for all the wrong reasons, that could have been Aurora giving that speech, and it would have made a lot more sense thematically. And speaking of that, let's take that pin down from earlier and talk about Princess Aurora. Elle Fanning says, Aurora takes pride in being ultra feminine. There's a lot of strength in being a woman and in accepting that in yourself. She also says, a lot of the other Disney princesses are like, we're gonna make her a strong princess and make her tough, so we're gonna make her fight. And it's like, is that what being a strong woman means? Like, we just have to have a sword and have armor on and go fight? Aurora can do that in a different way, in a pink dress, and it's beautiful that she keeps her softness and vulnerabilities. This is also a thing in Heart of the Moors. You know, she doesn't fight anybody or become some badass archery girl. She likes flowers and braiding her maid's hair and going around barefoot. This nobleman in her court, and as well as her royal advisor, are staging a coup against her. They think she's just like some ditzy girl that they just need to manipulate into marrying the evil guy. And for most of the book, she kind of seems like that. Like, I was reading it thinking, oh, well, you know, this is kind of like a book for younger readers. And then there's like an 11th hour twist where she's like, yeah, no, I wasn't born yesterday. I can very clearly tell that you've been trying to stage a coup against me. I was just playing along to like see what, you know, what the plan was. By the way, I have all my guards hiding behind that bush over there. You're under arrest. I like that even in the third act battle, she doesn't suddenly become a warrior princess. She's just snooping around. She's snitching on Michelle Pfeiffer's evil plan. She's not really fighting anybody. She's just rescuing her friends from a gas chamber. Yeah, that's a thing. And she doesn't win the day by like physically overpowering Queen Ingrid. It's just kind of her compassion and love for another person that ultimately is what saves the day. So Aurora is like actually not a very good queen. I mentioned that in the first movie, the humans versus fairies dynamic was just kind of an overlay to give the plot the appearance of depth where there was none. In fact, Maleficent crowning Aurora, the Queen of the Moors, just kind of feels like it was a nice gesture. The fairies were not portrayed in a way that conjured up ideas of like indigenous people. The point is, now in this movie, they really want us to see the Moor folk as their own disenfranchised culture of people. With that framework in mind, it's really hard not to look back at that moment and think, huh, maybe we kind of rushed into that one. Like, what business does Aurora even have to govern these people? So Mistress of Evil opens with Queen Aurora holding court. All of her subjects are mad at her. Fairies have been disappearing, and all the more folks suspect that human poachers are responsible. Well, I'm the queen of the moors, and I'm a human. We all need to have a little bit of kindness, she says as she like pets a bunny. She says it like she's weary of this anti-human sentiment, and she feels like her people are letting their prejudice cloud their judgment. But like, they're right. That's exactly what's going on. Later, she requests for Maleficent to cover her horns so that Philip's parents won't be distressed by her appearance. And the movie never ever tries to like dip a toe into the fact that she's embarrassed to be seen with the very people that she rules over. Aurora's dual role as both a human and the queen of the fairy people is a dynamic of the film. I hesitate to call it an arc because where she ends up at the end of the movie is kind of vague. So after Maleficent pieces out at the dinner, Ingrid tells Aurora that she isn't safe at the moors. She tells her that the wedding is still on. It will commence in 3 days' time, and everyone is invited, including all of her subjects from the moorlands. During her stay in the castle, Ingrid keeps putting her in these tight, constricting, formal dresses, and there's all these rules she's got to follow. If you've ever seen Cinderella 2, Aurora is Cinderella in that big, uncomfortable pink dress, and Michelle Pfeiffer is Prudence. All of these things in her life are suddenly changing, and she's just feeling very conflicted about where she is and what she's doing. Throughout the movie even, there's points where Ingrid refers to Aurora as having betrayed her own kind. There's this kind of implied loneliness to Aurora in both this and Heart of the Moors, where it feels like she doesn't really belong anywhere. At one point, she heads out onto the balcony to have a quick moment, and she says to Philip with like this almost panic in her voice, like, I feel like I'm not queen of the moors anymore. Okay, so here it comes. We're chugging along into that third act. We're reaching the culmination of 3 points. Remember those sacred burial grounds that Ingrid ordered desecrated? So that was a field of flowers called Tomb Bloom. They are flowers that sprout from the graves of dead fairies. Michelle Pfeiffer has all of these torn up, and on the morning of the wedding, Philip goes to Aurora's room and gives her one. She's like, Where'd you get this? Ooh, I got it from my mom, haha. She's decorating the whole castle with flowers. It's gonna be great, happy wedding day, love you babe. So it's the day of the wedding, and all of the moorfolk are coming to the kingdom to see their queen after an unexplained 3-day absence. Everybody, human and fairy, is so excited for this wedding. But what's cool is that all the fairies get to go inside first. The fairies congregate in the chapel. I can only assume that the chapel is the size that it is because they could only comfortably afford to build one that big for what little screen time it has. But I do find it kind of funny that this is supposed to be all of Aurora's people, but only about 80 dudes are there. I'd like to think that the rest of the fairies just didn't come because they don't really like her. The fairies sit patiently, waiting for the ceremony. They are alone in the chapel for a suspiciously long time. Meanwhile, with Connell out of the picture, there's absolutely nobody to rein in Bora. He plans to attack the kingdom on the day of the wedding. No more hiding. We're finally going to battle with the humans for our right to just exist. And if they don't like it, we're gonna freaking make them not alive anymore. Maleficent kind of feels bad that she's maybe gonna ruin Aurora's big day and probably kill her boyfriend. But like, Aurora totally threw her under the bus that one time, and like, she was really rude, so. Meanwhile, Aurora, being queen of the moors, is like, Tomb Bloom? Wait, what's this doing here? Why would the queen have this? Like, where would she even get it? And also, why would she specifically ask to decorate the whole castle with flowers when she doesn't like them and is allergic to them? Something fishy is going on here. So she goes to the queen's quarters. Finally, she finds the Pixie laboratory. She sees all these missing subjects locked in jars, confirming that, yeah, it was humans stealing fairies from the moors. But that's not all, because in a creepy little alcove is the spindle. And the spinning wheel, the one from the first movie that she pricked her finger on. Apparently the curse wasn't just like a one-time thing, it was actively embedded into the spindle itself, and that was how Queen Ingrid was able to curse the king with the death sleep. She just had to take the spindle and just like poke him with it. Ingrid shows up and, realizing that Aurora already knows too much, launches into her obligatory villain monologue where she explains her evil plan. Remember the Tomb Bloom? Well, apparently when you grind it down and mix it with iron, it becomes a powder, and when that powder touches a fairy, it reverts them back to their natural state. It's actually quite scary. This is like a game changer. So now the moorfolk are locked in a tightly enclosed chapel, and the Dark Fae are on their way to a battle that they think is just gonna be a walk in the park. And Aurora is locked in her room, unable to do anything with the sudden realization that this isn't a wedding. It's a trap. So we finally made it to the big battle, the giant action sequence of the film, and it goes hard. Characters die, and like main characters, like that blue fairy, dead. That tree guy, dead. And like they don't come back. They just stay dead. Usually in this type of scenario, there's like a big action scene and it's fun to look at, but there's a level of comfort in it because you know that like the characters are gonna be okay. Picture, like I'm sitting here in the theater, drunk as a skunk, watching all of Aurora's happy tree friends get murdered in a magical gas chamber, and I am loving it. It's human versus fairy, mother versus son, magic versus might, prince versus unnamed supporting character who inexplicably is 1/3 of like the big climactic thesis statement speech. Okay, like he has a name, I'm sure, but like I don't remember it. Prince Philip gets into a fight with Bora and the captain of the guard character or whatever, and he has this big speech about how this isn't his war and that he doesn't want this and he's not gonna fight you, Bora. He says as he holds an iron sword to Bora's neck. I guess the filmmakers just wanted to end on this wishy-washy note of all fighting is bad, but the movie they actually made with all the pieces there really portray much more of a nuanced take about how when tensions rise between the persecuted and the fear-mongering systems that actively call for their persecution, sometimes it isn't enough just to hold hands and try to be nice. This series so far has 3 characters that are defined by their pacifism and wanting to just try and get along peacefully, Bora and Maleficent's parents, and they all die. I think the movie is trying to tell us that going to war at all was a bad idea and that Bora was 100% in the wrong for ever wanting to go to war for any reason. But when you put it all together, like that's just not true. If they never had an attack, the Dark Fae would have just had to stay in hiding and sad and persecuted in their big cobweb island. Maleficent and Aurora never would have reunited or reconciled. The Moors would have been stripped of all their resources, and the fascist power wielder who controls the narrative would have won. Anyway, the battle rages on. Bora spares Philip's life after he learned that Ingrid tricked everyone. Aurora manages to get out and free most of the trapped moorfolk. Just when it seems like Ingrid might have the upper hand, Maleficent shows up and moves in for the kill. Before Maleficent kills her, Aurora steps in between them and apologizes for ever having doubted her, and she tells her that yes, she knows that she's angry, but that this isn't her. I know you, and this isn't you. You do not know me. And Aurora tells her, yes, I do. You're my mother. Probably one of the biggest reasons I like this movie and this series is this consistent theme of adoptive parenthood, as well as the portrayal of rejecting and cutting out toxic biological family members as being a healthy, normal thing you can do. This begins as early as Maleficent. We're back to these. In both of these, we learn more about Maleficent's childhood. We learn that her parents were killed by the humans a long time ago and that she was raised by the fairies. They go out of their way to let you know that Maleficent truly does think of these people as her real family. Even though her biological parents were good people and she has a right to love them, that doesn't make her found family less important. You can love your biological family and your adoptive family differently maybe, but you can still love them equally. Also throughout the movies, we have Aurora being adopted by the 3 good fairies, as well as Maleficent, and she cuts out her biological father from her life entirely. I mean, he dies, but like she doesn't mourn him. And in this movie, we get Prince Philip rejecting his biological mother because she's a war criminal. Maybe that thing with the captain of the guards was supposed to be like a surrogate father plotline, but I mean, that's not where it went. Maybe that was what it was supposed to be, but I don't know. I do want to say that I'm like 60% certain that I think this theme of adoptive parenthood was probably completely unintentional by everybody involved. I mean, just the fact that this movie ends with a wink towards the audience about how Aurora and Philip are about to have a biological baby just screams that the people in charge didn't realize that this was a reoccurring theme in the series. Regardless, it's all there, and I think that parents of adoptive children or step-parents should really keep an eye on this movie. Every time I've watched the movie, whenever Maleficent asks Prince Philip, do you love my daughter? It's so sweet. It makes me like, I could cry. Oh my, just come on. Anyway, now let's talk about the ending, which is kind of weird, and I have a lot of thoughts about it, and I would like to share a few theories. So when I saw this movie, I kind of had it in my head that the Dark Fae were supposed to be like the natural guardians of the Moors. They make this big deal about how they've been run off their land, so I just presumed that at some point they lived in the Moors because that's where fairies live. And given the first film where Maleficent seems to be the de facto protector of the place, I just kind of put the 2 things together. So now with the battle over and Michelle Pfeiffer unceremoniously turned into a goat and everything's fully integrated and we're having a wedding and everyone's happy now. I just kind of assumed that Aurora, who up until this point had been shown to be demonstrably a bad fit for Queen, would give control back to the rightful rulers of the Moors. Because, like, let me point out, she never goes back to the Moors. But going deeper into headcanon territory, I want to go back to something Aurora says during the dinner scene. When Ingrid asks her about her father's kingdom and his castle, "It was never my home. It was given to the people." But in Heart of the Moors, the whole plot revolves around her trying to juggle the responsibilities of being the Queen of the Moors and being Queen of the human kingdom of Persephorus, which apparently is the name of Stefan's kingdom. At first I thought this was just like a weird fantasy name that Holly Black made up, but I did some research and it turns out that Persephorus is the name of a medieval document upon which is printed the earliest known version of the story Sleeping Beauty. So that's just kind of a fun fact. Obviously the real explanation here is that Disney didn't coordinate their book tie-in very securely and now there's this weird plot inconsistency between the mid-quel novel they commissioned and the movie they made. But I do have my own interpretations. At the end of Heart of the Moors, Aurora announces before the court that her royal advisor was trying to stage a coup and she knows that the system does not work, so she is going to rework the whole thing by appointing a cabinet of advisors to help make her decisions. One could loosely interpret this to mean she just dissolved the monarchy system and replaces it with sort of a senatorial democracy. This, along with Holly Black's characterization of her feeling just uncomfortable and stifled, could be connected to the phrase, "It was never my home, it was given to the people." Maybe in actuality she's planning to never have children, so that the royal bloodline in Philip's kingdom ends with her, dismantling Ulstead's establishment too. Princess Aurora, socialist bug. That's just one interpretation though, and it's a pretty big stretch. I suppose the alternative is that Aurora is just the Phantom Menace of this series. Like maybe Aurora is just playing this elaborate game of 4D chess, because by the end of the film, she is now technically the queen of 3 separate kingdoms and has amassed more power than any other character in this series. I'm fairly sure though that the filmmaker's intent was that Aurora stays Queen of the Moors. I know in Philip's kingdom she's technically just the princess, but in my headcanon, the king just kind of quietly abdicated the throne as a PR move since he is quite culpable in his wife's actions. But I prefer my earlier interpretation. The movie has this frustrating Pocahontas-esque vibe of, oh, well, everyone was a little bit wrong. Just because Philip and Aurora weren't out here intentionally committing war crimes doesn't mean that they both haven't benefited from human privilege. Although it does genuinely seem that Aurora and Philip are like nice people. In real life, you don't have to actively be committing a genocide. Being complicit, even in a small passive way, is something you need to take responsibility for. That's why I really like this headcanon I came up with, where both King John and Queen Aurora abdicate their crowns because it means they actually accepted responsibility for their complacency. I mean, who's gonna stop me at this point, really? These ears, I did not get them for this video. I got them at my last Disney trip, although I found this picture of me wearing my Maleficent ears, eating a Maleficent ice cream cone at the Magic Kingdom, like a full year before Maleficent 2 even came out. But it's a nice bit of foreshadowing. Oh, by the way, I got my roots touched up. Don't worry about it. So we're coming up on the end of the video. Hagen, you made like this hour-long video for this, I guess, okay movie. Why are you investing so much time, money, effort into Maleficent, Mistress of Evil? I just want to assure everybody watching, I do not think that Maleficent 2 is some amazing, groundbreaking piece of artwork. I said that it was my favorite movie I saw last year, and that's true, but I don't think that means it was like the best made. Hey, Coco. You also want to be in the video? Are you a Maleficent stan? So just to make sure you don't think I'm crazy, I'm gonna talk about things I don't like in this movie. This theme of an imperialist society taking advantage of an othered group, and the emotional theme of like adoptive motherhood and the relationship between Maleficent and Aurora are both cool. They also have nothing to do with each other. And there's that captain of the guards character that just goes nowhere. The relationship between Maleficent and Aurora may be the emotional core of the film, but they spend very, very little screen time together. That opening dinner scene and this part where she's like, "You're my mother," are it. And speaking of Maleficent, like, she's the titular character, and yet her presence in this story feels very undercut by pretty much everything else. Angelina Jolie is in most of the film, but she strangely just doesn't talk for this giant, like, almost 45-minute chunk. I understand she's trying to do a lot of cool face acting, but it's just weird. Like, you're the main character. In the first movie, there's a narrator, just this, like, detached female voice with a British accent, and the narration is carried throughout the film in short bursts. And for the whole entirety of that movie, I just kind of assumed that it was Maleficent narrating. I don't know, maybe I'm just American and I can't tell British voices apart. But at the very end of that film, suddenly she's like, "Well, I was the one they called Sleeping Beauty." And it turns out the narrator is just an old Aurora the whole time. In this movie, narrator Aurora comes back for the opening narration and then never speaks again. I'd like to think it's because Aurora started telling this story and then realized it wasn't very flattering towards her, and so she just stopped. King John, this movie really, really wants us to believe that he's this great guy and a good king, when he's just demonstrably not. If King John weren't such an ineffective leader, none of this would have ever happened. In this novelization, there's a scene where the king is bemoaning the fact that Ingrid is making him wear these nice robes so that he can pose for a portrait. And I think it's supposed to be like he's like whipped. I guess that's funny. But it just reads like he has to be bullied by his wife into doing like basic things, like dress nicely for his job. Again, this circles back to something I think the writers didn't intend, which is that Ingrid is just clearly a more effective leader, even if she is evil. Part of the Moors takes place like 6 months after the events of the first movie, and Prince Philip is just still hanging out in this kingdom because he thinks Aurora is cute. And at one point he gets a letter from his mother, "Hey, what are you doing? Come home. You have responsibilities at your own kingdom." And it reads like they're trying to make her seem like cold and mean, but it's like she has a giant big fat point. She's 100% right there. And they'd like us to think he's like this really loving, cool dad. Philip and Aurora have been courting for what, 5 years? And she's just never met his parents. She's just now getting an invitation to dinner. And the king isn't even the one to invite her. It's Ingrid. During the dinner scene, Ingrid is trying to push Maleficent's buttons by bringing up the story of the witch who cursed the baby to sleep forever. And he's like, "What? Who would do such a thing?" Like, he's never heard this story before. The opening narration literally says that the story of Maleficent cursing Aurora traveled the land, and now everybody knows her and is afraid of her. When she first enters the kingdom, hundreds of peasants scream, "Ah, Maleficent," from the story we all know. But the king somehow doesn't. And during this dinner scene, he just keeps talking over both of them and cannot read the room at all. I just don't know why this movie felt like it needed a sympathetic biological father figure, especially when the first film had an incredibly on-the-nose moral about how ineffective men can be very dangerous when they're placed in positions of great power. Even at the end of the film, when he wakes up and he tells Philip, "Oh, I'm so proud of you, son, I'm so proud," he's not even looking at him, he's waving at the crowd. If I can put on my tinfoil horns for a second, I feel like maybe there was an earlier draft of the script where King John was this flighty, uncaring parent, and then the Suits were like, we don't want this movie to be super man-hatey, so we're gonna have like a nice guy king. And that's why in my headcanon he abdicates the throne, because he is culpable in this tragedy. I'm just gonna not take these out. What are the consequences that will arise from this? Like, I'll look crazy to, like... Also, I got a few tiny nitpicks. After Maleficent turns into the Phoenix, her magic turns from green to gold. I don't like it. I don't think that's as cool looking. Also, just like the original movie, I preferred the pink dress, but they ultimately settle with the blue one. Again, we're restating, I don't think this movie is some fantastic, amazing movie that everybody needs to see. I think it's a very whatever, okay film. I can see why plenty of people just wouldn't like it. I feel like in general people either didn't see it because they weren't interested in it, because this is a sequel nobody was asking for, including me, or they saw it and they immediately forgot about it. There's a small section of people I sometimes see in reviews or in videos or on Twitter who are like, "This movie's horrible. It's one of, oh my god, oh, it sucked so bad." And there's a lot of other people who are like, "Oh man, this is such a fun bad movie. It's crazy bad. Like, you can watch it and just laugh." And I'm like, really? It just seems like a pretty middle ground, okay film. This is like the Ant-Man and Wasp of live-action Disney movies. I don't think this film is any smarter or dumber than that film. It's just kind of fine. And I like it because it just so happens to have all these tropes and character types and visuals that I gravitate towards, and I don't see that often. Also, I like that especially with this sequel, it like expands on its universe, it creates a real world with a lore, but it's open enough to invite speculation. I like media where the storytelling and the world building is kind of holy. Like take Star Wars, for example. A lot of the plot points in the movies are quite vague, and that it inspires a lot of fans to speculate and write new stories. I think this franchise, I guess, does that. It invites you to supplement your own patches and get creative. I feel like this story asks a lot of questions and it's very interactive. And you might be sitting here like, Hagen, did you just compare Maleficent, Mistress of Evil to Star Wars? Yes. I mean, put aside all those technical triumphs and obviously the cultural relevance, I don't think Star Wars movies are like these amazing, fantastic stories. I think that for the most part, they're just fun, dumb action movies with characters you really like in a universe you find interesting. I didn't make this video so that people who watch this movie and didn't like it will suddenly be like, wow, I was wrong the whole time. Like, if you didn't like this movie, I get it. There's stuff to not like in it. And anyone can dislike something for any reason at any time. I more so just wanted to talk about Maleficent 2 because I wanted to bring to the attention of people who maybe didn't see it all the stuff that I liked and see if that interests you. So if you want to check it out, please do. At work, I've actually noticed a lot of people buying this movie on Blu-ray. The only other Blu-ray that comes through my line as often is probably Joker. So maybe this movie will have a new audience on home video. Please check it out. I would love for you to join the fold. The Maleficent fandom is very small right now. I need more fanfics. So that was Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, and this is the end of the video. Now shall you deal with me, O Prince, and all the powers of hell!